The new season of Warzone and Black Ops 6 is finally here, bringing with it a whole bunch of different stuff including new skins and new weapons, like the PPSH, Cypher 91, and the Feng 82. But arguably the most important thing Call of Duty have brought with this new update is the gigantic list of bug fixes. This really is a huge step in the right direction, as clearly they are prioritizing getting the game back into shape over some of the other updates they may have had planned. Inevitably though, this does mean that some of our settings may be a little out of date, so now is the perfect time to get them into shape too. Which is why in this video, I'm sharing with you the very best graphic settings for Warzone and Black Ops 6 right now. And these will be perfect for all different maps and modes, from Rebirth Island and Area 99 to Urzikstan, Nuketown and beyond. And we start with the display settings, specifically the refresh rate. Now this refers to the frame rate, so the frames per second. By enabling this setting, it ensures that we can get up to 120 frames per second. Without it, we'll default back to 60. To be able to have this setting on, you need a system that can run it, so that means PC or newer generation consoles, and you need a TV or monitor that can allow it as well. Now, if you do have those things and you still can't enable it, you might want to go into the settings of your console and make some tweaks there. For example, you may want to disable the ability to run in 4K, as the newer generation consoles, although they're great, can't simultaneously play on 120Hz and 4K resolution. The maximum they can run at, which is what I run, is 1440p in 120Hz. Okay, now for the brightness, I would recommend going up to 60, maybe 65, but certainly no more. That's because mixed with the other settings we're going to change today, it can get a little bit too bright and washed out. This also, of course, depends on your monitor settings, your TV settings, and your system settings. For example, on my Xbox Series X, I've actually disabled my HDR setting, because I like to have a little bit more control on each individual game. Now, just before we get into the rest of the settings, if you want to unlock the brand new Dark Matter, Abyss, and Nebula camos in Black Ops 6, or grind them extremely quickly in bot lobbies, be sure to check out Mitch Cactus. They're the biggest and most reliable in Call of Duty, which will help you grind out the weekly events, camos, and all the unlocks completely legitimately. You can enjoy highly discounted COD points at up to 80% off. They have over 10,000 verified Trustpilot reviews, and you can use code SPRING for 5% off. Okay, now back to the settings. Then as we come across to quality, we want to disable world motion blur, weapon motion blur, and depth of field. As the names suggest and the descriptions describe, they all add layers of blurriness to try and give a more immersive feel to the game. And whilst that is the case, it can just be kind of distracting. I don't think the game looks as good, and I do think it stops us from responding to things as quickly. And we have Fidelity FX CAS. A lot of people on Black Ops 6 especially have been complaining about quite a bit of blurriness on the game. Now this is one of the tools which is absolutely going to stop this. This is an inbuilt software mechanism to basically sharpen the images. So I've got mine switched on and I've got the strength on 80, and in fact honestly I might go even higher to 90 or even 100. I would particularly recommend this for next generation consoles, or well, the most recent generation of consoles, because it does take up just a tiny bit of processing power, and the older generation consoles honestly can't really handle that. But if you are on the PS4 or Xbox One and you do have blurriness, you can still put the setting on, maybe just don't go as high. For the on-demand texture streaming, I've gone optimized for now. If there are any visual bugs in the game, I will switch this to minimal immediately. Generally though, if you do have a bad internet connection, do put this on minimal, as ultimately you are live streaming these textures. Now as we come over to the view tab, we don't want to enable any presets or anything like that, switch those off. Then for field of view, we want to make sure it's over 100 ideally. But of course, something to remember when you are changing this setting is that it does depend on how big your monitor is and how far away from the screen you are. If you're on a gigantic screen and you're sitting on the other side of the room, for example, you might just play casually in the living room or something, then actually you don't want this setting on too high, as things are just going to be too small for you to see. And another thing to take into account is that the FOV slider is effectively a frames per second slider as well. So the higher you go with this, the lower the frames per second are going to be. So that's just something to take into account. But as I say, over 100 is an absolute must, otherwise you're just not going to see people in your peripheries. I personally run somewhere between 105 and 110, and I think that's going to be appropriate for most players. For ADS field of view, put this on affected. This makes it so when we aim in, we're aiming in at the value we've just set here, rather than defaulting back to 80 or 90. For weapon field of view, put this on wide. This makes the weapon look as small as possible, so we can see as much of the environment as possible. For third person field of view, I don't think that's going to be too important, but still put this on as high as you can go, 90. And then for camera movement, make sure you put these abilities unleashed, which is 50%. And then we want to head over to the interface. Now, this is actually where we can make a surprisingly big difference to how the whole game looks without any fancy NVIDIA cards or anything like that. It's by quite simply utilizing a color blindness setting to our advantage. So this is over on readability and on color customization. And then we want to head down to the color filter settings and put it on filter 2. This makes the game have such a nice palette where there's just a lot more contrast between enemies and buildings and the environment. So you can just see people much easier, and it has a side benefit of just looking nicer as well. So we want to put the intensity all the way up to 100 here. Now, if things look a little bit too saturated, maybe washed out, you can put the intensity down. And of course, we all have different monitors, which is something to take into account as well. If you've already got a presetting on, which makes things look saturated already, then this might be just a little bit too much. But for most standard setups, this is fantastic. Then finally, if you are a new Warzone player, then you do want to ensure that your minimap shape is on square, as it gives you about a 25% increase in the area you can see. And then that's everything for the important graphic settings. The rest of them that I haven't explicitly mentioned are very much subjective. They're not going to be make or break. Now, hopefully this video does help you out for this season. And if you do want to improve your controller settings as well, then please join me over in this video where I cover them all. If not, then goodbye for now.